So welcome everyone to Fishing with Sharper Spears, ABX Advice from the Trenches. My name is Emily Hill. I'm Senior Manager of Demand Gen at PeerSpot. PeerSpot is the buying intelligence platform where tech pros learn about enterprise products before buying, as well as we also help Demand Gen marketers fill their pipeline with high quality bottom of funnel leads and create voice of customer content for all stages of the buyer's journey. So today we're talking with Lynnice Wolf. Welcome, Lynnice. Lynnice is the Senior Director of Demand Gen at Menlo Security. She leads the global integrated marketing strategy for Menlo's digital demand gen and account-based experience efforts. Again, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, so before we get started, why don't you give yourself, introduce yourself a little bit and tell us about your work as well.
Yeah, so like you mentioned, I work at Menlo Security, and just in case for those of you that are not familiar with Menlo Security, we're a cybersecurity vendor where we're enabling organizations to outsmart threats, eliminate the attacks that are out there, making sure that as most of us are doing our work online, we do it safe and seamlessly. And all of that is through our one-of-a-kind isolation-powered cloud security platform. So, I've been in marketing now for, it seems like, over 14 plus years. And I do have a nice, unique background of B2B, from enterprise, where I was at HPE, to mid-size when I was at McAfee, and then startup, which is where I'm at now. And to your point, Emily, just managing now, I moved into this role, just to set context, in about May. And so it's owning all things global, digital demand generation, and to your point, account-based experience, which I'm super excited to talk about today.
Yeah, we're excited too. Before we get started, I also want to say that we'll be doing some polling questions. We'll be putting them up. So if you all could answer, we'd appreciate it and get the insights to add to the discussion. And as we're going, feel free to put in the chat or ask in the Q&A any questions that you have or ideas that you would like to hear more about. Maybe the chat's better than the Q&A at some point. We'll do a little bit of a Q&A at the end, but we encourage you to ask questions throughout. So let's get started. So of course, ABM and ABX are related, but can you give us a little bit of an explainer of what ABX is versus ABM? I think most of us are more, we're more experienced with hearing the term ABM versus ABX.
Yeah, and it's funny because I feel like these terms have been used interchangeably, but I do think that there is a difference, and it's important to understand what is the difference. So, if you break down ABM, that's account-based marketing, and I feel like it's really evolved from the 7+ years when I started doing it at HPE. But from my perspective, it's a marketing strategy, emphasis on marketing strategy. And it's really targeting accounts where you're focused predominantly on building out the pipeline. So more of the demand gen flow, whereas ABX, that's account-based experience. And I feel like this term started to surface probably the last 2+ years. And to me, it's a go-to-market strategy. It's not your one-off campaigns or your one-off tactics, but it's really leveraging data and insights so that you can make orchestrated, relevant marketing and sales actions throughout the B2B customer lifecycle. Now, I'd say the goal of ABX, it's really focused on one common goal. The big kicker is it's shared between sales, marketing, and customer success. And that big goal is driving revenue versus the opposite, which would be driving pipeline.
Great, thank you so much. So why don't we start with the first poll, which is, are you already integrating ABX or ABM as a part of your strategy? So if you wouldn't mind answering that'd be great. We'll give you a couple seconds here.
Oh, dang, I was trying to vote too, and I just noticed that panelists can't vote.
Yeah.
FOMO, Emily.
All right, cool. Okay, so everyone here is already doing ABX. So I think we can skip the second poll because it was about for those not already running those programs, why not? So why don't we go into question 2, which is, how do you get started with ABX? Can you set the stage for us? Can you tell us, how you integrate customer voice into your ABX as well?
Yeah, so I think it all first starts out in building your village. I am a huge proponent of this. I'm also a mom of 3 girls. So aside from the fact that I probably don't get enough sleep as it is, I know for all of our parents who are out there, they can relate. Even if you got the fur babies, you can also relate that you really need your village to survive. Same goes for building out an ABX strategy. So as I mentioned, ABX focuses on one common goal that's shared between sales, marketing, and customer success. So again, that's why I'm so adamant about it needs to start with building out your village. So you may be asking yourself, okay, well, who should be part of my village? I can share from our perspective, who we started off with. And the first one was our executive team. So that consists of our CRO, our CMO, our CEO. Why they're so important is we want to make sure that we're aligned and that we're getting their buy-in. We need money in order to continue to move. But we also want to make sure that we're aligned in a sense that this is a go-to-market approach from the top down. And it's not one of those, oh, well, marketing's coming up with another program. So again, that's why it's so important to emphasize a lot of your time there. The second piece that's equally important is obviously our regional sales leaders. And I think it's really important to level set, but most importantly, to get their feedback. When I say level set is, just like what you and I went through, what is ABX? And then going into the complexities of now the buyer's journey and the importance of shifting to this go-to-market focus where, that thing is like the road to Hana. You can't start looking at the individual. For those who've been to Maui, by the way, you can't look at the individual, but it's important to look at the account. And so from there, it's also having the conversation. What problems does it solve? In marketing, we hit them with a statistic like 5% of web visitors fill out a form, which means 95% of the time the person is anonymous, and sales is like, yeah, okay, who cares? But where they start to open up and where we can start having the conversation is, hey, this is the problem that we see that it solves. What do you think? And then that starts the conversation where they're coming in and they're saying, yeah, we don't know which accounts we should prioritize, who we should focus on. So it's not just speaking at them, but also having the conversation together. So then we can figure out, how do we fix this together? The third group that I would say, we don't talk or hear about them as much. To me, super important to have a conversation and build that village with sales operations. I found that in our journey, there were certain fields in Salesforce that we were looking to add to gain better visibility in our ABX model. And instead of coming with our huge laundry list of asks and saying, here, go do it for us, it was important that we sat down together. We understood what their priorities were, what were their challenges. We found that there was overlap in a lot of the things we wanted to focus on. So then it was sitting down in a workshop to understand, how do we have that common goal together? A couple of the others, regional marketing leaders. I've spent majority of my career in regional marketing, and I'm a huge believer that they're the conduit between global marketing and sales. Obviously, they hear what's happening on the streets and they see what's coming down from marketing, so they can relay that information as well as feedback. So they're massively important. And then obviously, customer success team. I think your question was then, how do you integrate customer voice into ABX? Was that right, Emily?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, of course, I have to ask that. We're PeerSpot. We one of our focuses is, sharing customer voice content. So yeah, if you could tell us a little bit about that, that'd be great.
Yeah. So we knew that in order to be successful, we had to use our customer voice throughout our buyer's journey. Why? Because it helps to connect them with our company. It helps to build that consistent story. And then it makes them feel more confident that we can solve the outcomes that they're looking for. So what we ended up doing was, we're a big fan of workshops. And that's what we did with our customer advocacy team, where I met with my team, which is ABX, campaign, and content. We came together, aligned, similar to all those things that I shared of what we did with sales. But we wanted to answer the question, how can we be more intentional in our campaigns throughout the buyer's journey, so that we can understand what are the specific customer pain points, and what are the gaps that we could potentially fill. And so that whole exercise of just level setting, what we found is what's available. What we didn't know was that our customer advocacy team was rolling out a voice of the customer program. So they were literally building it alongside us building our ABX program. And why that was so important is because they have access to surveys, which give us information, plug in, and it fits really well, actually. They have intent data from PeerSpot that they're also collecting. So that way it's important that we're meeting at the beginning, not at the end where we've already figured out our programs and then we're working backwards to figure out how do we plug in, but we're working alongside them today so that as they start to build it up, any data and intelligence that we can leverage, we integrate it into how we message. The second piece, in addition to working with customer advocacy, is we're now scheduling meetings with sales. They're in front of customers every single day. I mean, they are your biggest data and intelligence pool when you want to know what the pain points are. So what we're looking at are the accounts that we've won in, and then scheduling time with those particular sales reps to understand what was the pain point that Menlo uniquely solved, and how did we, end up closing? How did we get to that point of purchase? So again, all of these conversations, all that data and intelligence is helpful so we can build our relevant outreach between both sales and marketing within our messaging throughout the B2B lifecycle.
Thank you for saying all of that, especially because I feel like one of the main points of that it wasn't that you pointed it out, but what I took from it was really how important it is to align within the teams at the company. Like you mentioned customer success, customer marketing, you mentioned sales, like we are all a team together, right? And we, the disconnections is where things kind of go haywire.
Yeah.
So I love how you, just mentioned how, all of these players come into place to actually create such a great experience for customers.
Yeah, I mean, oftentimes we come in and we have our own agenda and we're like, look, you're gonna look at this. And it's like, I've got 50 other things that are going on, get in line. And so I think you just take the approach when you take both of those ears and you put them in your mouth, the more listening we can do. And even reiterating, is this what I heard? And then when they start to see the feedback in your plans, that's how you get people who are starting to lean in. At least that's been my experience. I can't say it works for everyone.
No, I agree with you. I think that's the really the best way.
Yeah.
So, before we go into our next question, let's pull up another poll. So for those doing ABX, ABX programs, which we learned is everyone here, how did you identify your target accounts? So we give a few minutes or a few seconds for everyone to fill it out.
I love the one marketing closed their eyes and pointed to the names. Okay, should we see the results? Huh, 100% marketing ops and sales collab. That's great. That's awesome. That's, you guys are you're ahead of the curve, right? So, now that you've set the stage, Lynnice, and kind of gotten everyone on the same page and really excited about it, how do you start to build that foundation and strategy? Yeah, so I would say once you've built out your village, and for us, when I say this, we did this in parallel. We built out our village while we were building out our foundation, which I think is one of the main pieces of being relentless in the basics, is build out that foundation. We see that really in 6 different phases. The first one is, what's your strategy and objective? We brought on 6 Sense, I don't know, I think it was back in November. And instead of just looking at the technology and identifying, hey, these accounts look in market, let's go after them. It's first, what is it that you're trying to achieve? And how does that align with the company's business goals? Then you go into target. Who are we targeting at the different buying stages? And there's a lot of different variables that go into how we view targeting. It's ICP, it's intent, it's those who are engaging with marketing. But we look at those accounts again by buying stages. And for those of you guys who have read the Challenger sale, we also know that there's 5.4 people. So when you look at ABX and you flip the funnel on its head, you start to target who are the accounts you're going after. How do you expand those contacts who are equally important, because they all have different perspectives? So how do you get in front of them? The third piece of it is messaging. And what we started to do as part of this practice is what are the key assets and the landing pages that are relevant based off of the pain point or the industry that we're going after. And it's almost this like organizing exercise where you're starting to map out your assets by journey. It's also really helpful because you can see if there's any gaps there. But the fourth is what's your engagement channel? And of course, always highly recommended to take an omni-channel approach where you're using various channels. And so that's where we've leveraged, I mentioned we have 6 Sense. We're leveraging the 6 Sense ads, and then we can get really personalized using LinkedIn, doing their account-based ads to their people-based ads, leveraging their network, the beat goes on. The fifth piece of that I'd say in the 6 is sales activation. And that is table stakes. And in some ways, we've learned this the hard way, but it's okay, we've learned. And the learnings of it is you're spending all of this time putting effort, money into building all the things that I just shared out. It's important to share those resources that you have available to sales. And then it's important, and what we've learned is setting the expectations. What are you asking them to do? And how do we then, the last piece of it, number 6, is how do we measure the success of it? What's the reporting that we can share with the leadership team on what worked and what didn't work? And then how do we iterate from there?
Awesome. Thank you. We actually have a couple of Q&A questions for you, if you wouldn't mind. So first we have, how quickly did you see success with 6 Sense?
Yeah, 6 Sense will also tell you that it takes about 4 quarters until you really start to see success. And I would say that's pretty spot on. I think the beginning portion of it is just building trust with your sales team, because oftentimes they're just, they're not trusting the data, especially if you don't have massive amounts of volume that you can analyze, just all the data input that you're getting from there. So I will say it takes quite a bit of time, at minimum 1 year.
Okay, thank you. Another question is, what kind of tactics are you leveraging in LinkedIn for ABX?
Yeah, some of the tactics that we're leveraging, I mean, we've gone real intense. We're all about the testing and the piloting. So 2 things in LinkedIn that we've done is more of the account-based motion. So we look at targeting accounts through their audience network, and then also through their news feed. That's something that we started. Other discussions that we've gone into is, or actually the other piece that we've done is retargeting. So having a call to action, do you want to request a demo? I think there's still more that we can do there. The other piece is the conversational ads. So if you have someone in a leadership position, they can send out messages to your target audience. And then even just some of the smaller things like playing with, still images versus dynamic images, looking at videos. So all of those things we're still testing right now.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Another question, within this context is, and you mentioned a little bit earlier about intent data. Where exactly does intent data sit in the strategy arc?
Yeah, I think it's definitely part of the beginning foundational work. Intent data sits within how we build our target audience and at what stage that we target. And that's all based off of the research that these individuals and accounts are doing. So what we do is we utilize the signals within our top of funnel, middle of the funnel, and bottom of the funnel. That way, that's the other biggest piece. Instead of your typical spray and pray, we don't want to waste our resources and the time on people who aren't showing any interest in that specific point of time.
Right. Thank you. So let's see here. Where am I? Sorry. So, how do you establish a process for ABX?
Yeah, I love this question because I get jacked up when it comes to processes and how do you build that out? How do you optimize it? How do you scale? I think a great exercise that I would recommend is building out your journey mapping on how you anticipate a prospect to go through your funnel. I think part of that preliminary work is, think of, you have a white paper right in front of you and you draw 3 horizontal lines. The first one is, what does that engagement level look like? And we started even thinking earlier back to the sales activation. Okay, we should have an enablement session. And from there, reps are off running, BDRs, SDR, whatever your flavor of, business development rep, they're off running, looking at those accounts to target. They're putting them in their sales loft cadence or whatever, outreach. and they're doing social selling, maybe they're doing call blitzes. So that's what we're starting to envision. And of course, working with sales to see, is this the level of engagement in addition to our marketing engagement? The second horizontal line, we then look at operations. So what report is sales going to leverage in order to give them actionable data? And then you also look at, I mentioned what the sales cadence is. How do we track the effectiveness of that sales cadence used? Then you look at the third horizontal line, that's technology. So what technology is being used? Why do I care about this? Because oftentimes, even myself can associate things, one simple action to one technology, but in fact, you're leveraging a plethora of technology throughout the entire journey. And so when you're talking about reporting on sales actions, for us, that's 6 Sense and Salesforce coming together. When you talk about sales cadence effectiveness, that's Sales Loft. So you start to get this bigger idea of how the kind of workflow goes, but I would take it a step further. I talked about journey mapping, and I would build that out. How do all of these activities tie together based on what marketing is doing and what sales is doing? And from there, you start to build out, okay, you start off with your ABX segmentation, AKA your target audience, and then you go into the marketing channel. What does that look like? Okay, well, from there, if they're engaging with you, maybe that produces a lead, or maybe it could produce a hand raiser, somebody that said, hey, reach out to me. What's the next step? What's the process? And what we started to find is, as you start to multi-thread between your omni channels, between sales, you start to uncover some gaps.
Okay, thank you. And speaking of gaps, what are some of those that you've identified in the past that folks should look out for?
Yeah, I would say a big gap for us was around sales reporting. I emphasized, hey, as I started building out this process and I looked at the operational piece, I think the thing we were stumped with is, how do we make this data actionable? We're moving away from traditional marketing where we're just, showing leads. How do we show it at an account level? But how do you make it actionable without making it too complicated? Because unfortunately, it is a little complicated. I think, I mentioned before that we were building our village while we were building out the framework. So part of our learnings was the challenge we were up against is sales wasn't following up on our MQLs, which is not a huge surprise. I think a lot of us have that issue. But when we started to dig deeper, it was because there's massive amount of volume of leads, and they were completely overwhelmed by them. They didn't know where to prioritize, where to focus. In some cases, you had multiple MQLs for one account. What exactly am I supposed to do with that? And so in sitting with them, we came up with the solution, and we designed what we're calling our Salesforce dashboard. It's called the hot board. And the intent there is for them to prioritize and focus their attention by account. So walk with me here. I'm going to try to paint a visual without actually showing you the visual. But what we've done is we've created this dashboard that they come to every day. And when we talk about where do we prioritize, let's look at step one. Those are your hand raisers. So while we're doing our marketing thing and we're pushing and we're building awareness and driving them to our website, and they're saying, reach out to me, I filled out a form, you should prioritize those first. And you should reach out to them pretty quickly. Why? Because the competition will swoop in and they'll take them away from you.
Sure.
Then priority number 2 is, how do you start to layer in those priority accounts? What do I mean by that? So what we look at and what you hear a lot now is MQA, which is marketing qualified accounts. We take it a step further because we don't want to call anything marketing. Then it gets all territorial and, oh, this is marketing's thing. No, this is our thing. So we call it Menlo qualified accounts. It worked out perfectly for us.
I like that.
Yeah, thank you. And so what we do is we layer our target audience. We look at our ICP, our ideal customer profile. And that's all the propensity data and the algorithms that really smart people on my team do to identify who has a higher probability to work with us at an account level. Then we layer in the intent of who is actually doing enough research to show that they're in market. And then the other layer that we look at is who's actually engaging with us, who's going to our events, our webinars, and we combine those things together to make up our MQA. So that's priority number 2. Priority number 3 is, okay, we look at accounts who are in decision purchase, maybe they're not in market. And then, hey, if you still have some free time on on your schedule, then let's look at those accounts who are in the awareness and consideration phase. That way it's very clear as they start their day, who do they need to start engaging with? So hopefully I painted a good enough picture on a lot of that hard work, but I'll say that all stemmed from seeing that gap by just doing that process of engagement, operations, technology, then the whole journey mapping piece of it.
Okay, thank you. We have another question. What KPIs are you looking at with your target accounts?
Yeah, so I feel like it's really important depending on where you are in your journey. And so just to set context as well, we're under a year of starting our ABX program. And so I think what's most important is taking a crawl, walk, run approach. I think if you read blogs, books, podcasts, what they're going to tell you is, and I don't disagree with it, is it's all about measuring account win rate, deal velocity, and increasing the average selling price. But for us right now, we have a huge opportunity to fill in those meetings and pipelines so we can get to that point, especially once we're all aligned, because that does take time, doesn't happen overnight, let's be honest. So again, what does crawl look like for us in terms of KPIs? So we started our program, we'll say 3 to 6 months when we kicked it off. What was important for us is to look at, of those accounts, how many are we actually reaching? How many are engaging with us, and how many opportunities have been created? And that is looking against all of our accounts in the, in our Salesforce database. So what we discovered from that is we saw 2 times more reach and engagement in ABX accounts. And then we saw a 29% increase. So why do I tell you all of that? Because it's so important to take a crawl, walk, run. Those same statistics we shared with our executive team to let them know, hey, look, we're onto something. So I said crawl, walk, run, right? From a walk standpoint, what we're now discussing is, 9 to 12 months later, and maybe a little bit beyond, how do we evolve our ABX metrics? So what we want to do is we keep our leading indicators. We have our reach and our engagement. But what we're also doing is looking at what are the lagging indicators. And that's, what are the accounts that became 6QA within a given time period? Same thing for MQA. And the other piece is, how many accounts were actually created, did we have a meeting for that came from a 6QA or an MQA within that given period of time? Again, as we start to evolve, and especially as we start to integrate our KPIs as a company, I see our run going back to those 3 metrics that I shared with you, which is account win rate, deal velocity, as well as increasing average selling price.
Okay, cool. We want to put up another poll. So is your sales team on board with your ABX leads? So we'll give a few seconds for people to answer. Okay, I think maybe we can see the results. Okay, so 2/3 of you say that your sales team is on board, and 1/3 of you say no. And then we'll do another poll real quick. Of those of you already doing ABX, which, as we know, is the majority of people here, where are you on the journey to ABX metrics?
I love these. You cobbled something together with bubblegum and duct tape. Sometimes that's what it feels like.
Right, exactly. We got to make it real here.
That's right. Hey, look, I love it raw.
Folks, if you don't mind, answering this question, I'll give you a couple of seconds more. All right. Awesome. So fortunately, no one's wondering if they should, if they're supposed to track metrics. But yeah, like 2/3 of you are, cobbling things together with bubblegum and duct tape, and 1/3 of you is all over it. So let's ask you a little bit more about that. How do you, or what metrics should folks be measuring, and what does a good ROI look like? Lynnice?
Yeah, I think that goes back into what I just shared. Really, it, goes back into, I think the run is
Mhm.
the account win rate, deal velocity, increasing average sales price. But again, I think it's super important. I think a lot of these can become really unwieldy. If I can't figure out my account win rate because of, hey, I'm at a startup and maybe we don't have a massive volume of customers or whatever your situation may be, that would be the one piece of advice that I would share with the team, because it's hard to say, well, what does ROI look like? I think it's different at all of our companies and where we are. So I think using the base metrics, just a baseline of where are you at today? And if you were to run this program 3 to 6 months, using some of those pieces like reach, engagement, opportunity creation, how do you move the needle? And then if you take it a step further, and as you get more mature in your program adoption and you're working together, you got a well-oiled machine, you could start getting to that walk phase. And again, the metrics that I've shared with you guys, that's what's currently working for us. But there's lots of resources that are out there, that I would encourage you guys to take a look at.
Yeah. And like you said, it depends on your company, which is also a lot of things, like for instance, like size, your company size, like where you are in your growth phase. So it is going to depend, but thank you for sharing yours. How do you scale an ABX, your ABX strategy? For instance, like, can you scale ABX, from 1-to-1 to 1-to-few and 1-to-many? Are you really even able to scale from 1-to-many?
Yeah, I think that you're going to hear me talk about being relentless in the basics a ton, because I think it's really important to establish, you're going to hear it again, a framework. And for us, it's really establishing, what does that framework look like from a campaign perspective and from an ABX entitlement perspective? What does that mean? ABX entitlement is your 1-to-1, your 1-to-few, your 1-to-many. I think the other layer that I would add on top of that is defining out what are the rules of engagement with each of the key stakeholders. Once you can build that, then you got a repeatable program. There's certain things that you customize and you change along the way, but when you have that strong foundation, it helps you to just move a hell of a lot faster. Now, again, what does that look like for us? I'm happy to open the kimono and share. So we're currently building out our campaign tiering model. And the way that we look at it is tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. Tell me more. I know I'm hearing you guys. So tier 1 is what we define as our annual campaigns. They're driving awareness, pipeline, revenue. I also consider these our 1-to-many campaigns. Okay. Then we look at our tier 2, where that's a point in time campaign, where of course we're building out pipeline, we're looking at revenue, and all of it is supporting, it's kind of under the tier 1 umbrella theme. So we're not going completely rogue, but it's with a specific account segment. So think of like financial services as an example. And from there, you can do your 1-to-few, your 1-to-1. Then when you look at a tier 3, for us, that is really, it could be corporate or regional driven. And it's more of our agile requests that we always see to come through. And that's again, 1-to-few, 1-to-1. But then the question is, okay, well, how many of these campaigns can you actually run in a quarter? And we have a pretty nimble team. Right. So I think in order to answer that question, what's the checklist of deliverables? So when you talk about a tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, it's also starting to break out rules of engagement. So when we look at tier 1, that requires a significant coordination across the entire company. And so you start establishing rules of engagement. This is what you can expect from our account-based experience team. They can build out the account segmentation. We can do a lot of the promotion on the LinkedIn channels, et cetera. You also have content that's building out top of funnel, middle of the funnel assets. You have regional marketing, who's probably pushing a lot of the bottom of the funnel activities. And then, customer advocacy, I kind of told you, that's when your village starts to come in and you divide and conquer with each other. Think of tier 1, again, it's a lot of significant coordination. As you go down, you can only do so much. You only have so much time in the day. So you start to dwindle that level of energy that you're putting in each of the tiers and then being very prescriptive. So it's not as much coordination in tier 2, but there is some, whereas tier 3, it's probably predominantly driven majority by the regions. And so again, just having that clear checklist of deliverables and having those things baked, it just helps you to move a lot quicker and then even start to localize and personalize so you can be more supported in a one-to-one versus completely reinventing the wheel.
Okay, thank you. I feel like you've given such great info today. I've certainly learned a lot. So before we wrap up, before we go into Q&A, what would you tell us a little bit about, like, what is the secret sauce to a stellar ABX program? Like, maybe 3 things that people can take away to implement better ABX today, like tangible things.
Yeah, I mean, there's quite a few. So everything that I just mentioned today, I would also say establishing the core alignment between your account-based experience, campaign, content, and marketing operations team. Again, there's all these like villages that you're continuing to establish. So I will continue to talk and sing about that. I feel like some of the lessons we learned, let me just unpack that one. Some of the lessons that we learned is we were operating as separate functions. I'm talking about ABX content, our internal home base. We were operating as separate functions with separate plans, and we didn't have that one integrated and orchestrated plan. And if you think about it from a content perspective, they influence the type of activities that we run to the assets that we lead prospects to on our website. Let's unpack the campaign function. They give us structure to align with our messaging and how we wrap our campaigns in a box, and then how we feed that to the regional teams so that they're empowered to go and localize that without having to use all their resources and energy. You then talk about ABX, and that allows us to become more intentional and personalized in our outreach based on where prospects are throughout the buyer's journey. And then come on now, you got to wrap it all together with your data and analytics for marketing operations. And that's what helps us to optimize the tools that we have in place. And what are the levers that we need to pull based off of that data and intelligence. And so for me, these are the centers of excellence. These are the pillars that represent our, demand generation team. So I think it's massively important. I think the other key takeaway is just being relentless in the basics. I can't say that enough, but I think it's going even further. Understand your village's business. I think understanding their strategy, their priorities, what are their challenges? That way they feel like they're being heard, and we can come up with common goals and a plan together. The third piece of it is, again, it goes back to being relentless in the basics. It's building out that foundation. Figure out how you can scale, how you get to that, more advanced ABX where you can personalize, test, iterate, learn, repeat. Those would be my 3 takeaways.
Okay, thank you. And I just want to, put a point on the, the basics thing. I mean, it's so easy to put the cart before the horse, right? But if you have those basics in place and a great foundation, you're really setting yourself up for success.
Yeah, no, I completely agree.
Okay, so we're going to open the session up for Q&A. So if you have any questions, please go ahead and put them in the Q&A box, or feel free to also type them in the chat. First, did you get any pushback on building your village? Were all the different teams willing to work with you and contribute to this process? And if not, how did you work around that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're always going to get pushback. I would say the biggest lesson that I've learned is instead of approaching and coming to the table with my own initiatives, it really is like, it sounds really simple and it's really not, team. It's just listening to them, scheduling the time to, meet with our leaders and understand their business. So tell me, what are your top priorities? What are the challenges that you're running into? What I never want to lead in with is, how can marketing support you? Because we're going to get a list of events that we need to be at. And so I always try to reposition and then make sure that whatever I'm talking about, I'm asking more questions. I'm really genuinely curious about their business, and they start to see that in my plans. Again, that doesn't happen overnight, but I think once we start to engage more in those conversations and they see that we're listening to them, you get more people to lean in. I will say you can't win everybody over. As much as I try, you can't win everyone over, but I think it is super helpful. And the approach that we've taken is, a lot of times what I've read is build a pilot team. build a pilot team of sales to test this out with, make all your mistakes, all your learnings, and then scale. Well, that didn't work for us. Why? Because we have maybe 20 to 30 reps globally. Once everybody found out we had success, everybody wanted access to that.
Sure.
So the different, take that we took on that was meeting with each of the regional leaders, listening, but also getting advocates where we really doubled down and showed the value, got their feedback. They saw the power of the tool. And so when we started to get into meetings, it wasn't just, hey, everyone, this is why you should care. It was actually the salesperson that was saying, guys, you really should listen. This is a really powerful tool. This is how I've used it. And so that has been really an area that we continue to double down in. And I think the other last piece, and this is what we're working on today, because like I said, Rome wasn't built in a day.
Yeah,
But
we're in the trenches right now. That's what this
I'm just saying,
about,
we're just,
right?
we're trying to live the dream. But the other piece is when we do start to see those successes, it's so important, just like your wind wires that you have internally, it's so important to share the success. Even if you were able to get a meeting, there's nothing too big, too small. I think it's important to continue to evangelize, which is why I have a dedicated person to focus on ABX.
Awesome. That's awesome. We have another question is, does sales still dictate some of the accounts they want to focus on, or are they totally bought in to how you are IDing targets?
No, I mean, that's a huge exercise that we're going through today. I think obviously, they're going to have their feedback. They're going to have accounts that they feel like, no, we really need to double down. And that's great. Let's have the conversation, but come to the conversation with data. Let's look at the data. And we're always looking, I mentioned our ICP, where we have our highest propensity to buy accounts. It's important to refresh and relook at that model every 9 months, which is what we're also doing right now. Because we need to make sure we're getting buy-in, we're getting feedback. So of course, sales is always going to have the accounts that they feel we should be paying attention to. And I think it's really important that we get their feedback. But again, what we action is based off of data and intelligence.
Okay, thank you. If anyone has any more Q&A, we're happy to answer that. Otherwise, we'll give them a couple seconds here.
And thank you so much for all the questions. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. It's really added to the conversation, I think.
Yeah, well, and it's interesting because I think, I'm a huge advocate. I'm constantly looking to learn, but it's also not just, everybody that's in the seats, but we all learn together. I think the more we can share, it's almost like, when you're having a baby and everyone's like, oh, how is it? And you're like, oh, it's amazing. Not for me. I'll tell you upright what was going on. And that's, kind of how I feel about my approach here. I think the more we can share, the more we can learn and not reinvent the wheel.
Totally. We do have another question. So to that point, they ask, where do you go for your ABX best practices and advice?
Yeah, I look at a lot of places. One, I look at marketing communities that are out there. I have to give a huge shout out to the Peak community, where their goal there is to get 1% better every week. So I think embracing, leaning into your marketing communities, there's so many people out there that are willing to help and that have a wealth of knowledge. That's one. I think two is also leaning in on LinkedIn. There's so many people right now that are having the discussion about ABX, what's working, what's not working. I think just taking the time to lean in and see what people are saying, find people that are big influencers that are out there, because there are ABX evangelists. Follow them. What are they talking about? I think what that's going to lead you into, because it seems so overwhelming and how the hell am I going to have time for all of this? Even if you just take a couple minutes, you're going to find they also have podcasts. And I think that's where it's led me, where I start listening if I'm driving to work or, driving to school, or listening, while my kids are in gymnastics, I'm listening to these podcasts, and I find them to be really helpful to start forming, what are the things that I should look at, and just having my own opinion on things based off of the experience we're going through.
Yeah, I agree. Podcasts are really great, and I can't help but quickly plug ours. Dude, where's my pipeline?
Girl. Yeah.
Dude, where's my pipeline? So check that out too, wherever you get your podcasts. Is there anyone that you think, you mentioned, following people and things like that. Are there any people that you could shout out here as well?
Oh gosh. I do have people, and of course their names are escaping me. I would say John Russo. He does the B2B fusion. He has an ABX session with Meg, and of course, Meg, I'm sorry, I forgot your last name. Every Friday at 8 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Huge shout out to them. I've learned so much from John. I think the world of him. That's the one that's popping up in my head at the moment. Again, Peak Community. I would say that community has just been everything for me. I've learned so much from them. So those would be the two that I can think of off the top of my head.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right. It looks like we don't have any more Q&A questions. So, are any final thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of goes along the lines of, what I've continued to say throughout this entire webinar. And then what we were just talking about, I think it's so easy to read blogs and listen to podcasts and feel like, oh my God, I'm such a slacker. How come I'm not personalizing enough? Or how come I'm not, I think throughout the entire process, give yourself some grace. And I think it's important to understand that we're all on this ABX journey where we're trying to be more intentional, more customer focused. So I would just say lean in, let's keep learning from each other. That way, don't reinvent the wheel. It's like my biggest pet peeve. So don't reinvent the wheel. Let's learn from each other.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Lynnice, and thank you to everyone for attending today. We'll also, if you want to listen to it again, which I think I will, certainly, maybe a few times, because such great information and so much, and so appreciated. We'll be sending out, a link to that video as well. So thank you all again, and have a great rest of your day.
Yeah, thank you all.